So the precursors for a crisis empirically, and Richard Vague is another person I suggest you invite to speak to you here. Richard's got the weirdest last name in history.
Yes.
He's the most precise man I've ever met. And he established two of America's major credit card companies. He won't tell me how much he's worth. He's worth a lot. But in running a credit, the consumer credit side of his business, he got worried about the level of mortgage debt that he saw occurring in the build-up to the crisis. And he then became a critic of the extent to which we create debt in Western society. He's now running what he called the Private Debt Project. And he commissioned a study looking at all the economic crises of the last 1.5 centuries. And in those crises, he found that there were two empirical triggers that applied across all those countries. Private debt exceeded 1.5 times GDP, and over a 5-year period before the crisis, that debt ratio rose by 17% or more. Now, America, the UK, Spain, etc., well and truly qualified for that back in 2007. These are the countries that identify as now fulfilling those criteria, ranked, of course, by the scale of their GDP. So if you look at China, which is the most egregious example, its GDP is now over $11 trillion per annum. When the crisis, 5 years ago, its debt ratio was 148% of GDP. Now it's 210%. An enormous increase in its private debt level. Absolutely gigantic increase, the biggest in history. Canada, a 35% increase. South Korea, a bit smaller, but still the debt levels are much, much higher than Richard's trigger level. Australia qualifies. Sweden, not quite the same increase in debt level, but an enormous level of debt to begin with, and Belgium. So those are the countries I think are most likely to have a crisis in the next 1 to 3 years. And other possible crisis countries include this list, including France and Singapore, the most likely ones. So crises are not going to occur in the countries that had a crisis back in 2007 because they're still caught in the aftermath. They're suffering from what I call not secular stagnation, but credit stagnation. But the countries that are likely to join them in the next 1 to 3 years include those ones, particularly the ones in red that I've shown in that chart.